Hi everyone, hope you're all well. So, this is a subject I have covered before, but I think it's important because I think it's not spoken enough about enough in mainstream channels. It always has to be kind of a marginal issue, or rather, it feels that way because when people bring it up, mostly men, it's on the sidelines. It's only way this issue could be spoken about seems to be on the sidelines because there's been an absolutely disgraceful lack of attention in the mainstream. And I don't really like talking about mainstream media because it sounds a bit like a conspiracy, and I don't like to go down that path, but it's true. I mean, the issues I'm going to be talking about here are not raised enough. At least some of them aren't. Misandry is alive and well, I believe. I think that it gets a free pass far too often. A little bit like anti-white racism gets a free pass far too often, and it really, it really irritates me. Um, Now, I just want to make a disclaimer here before getting into this because I think it's important. You know, if you take this position, if you say that this is a problem and it needs to be challenged, and some of the false claims from feminists need to be challenged, you're immediately pigeonholed as this kind of bitter men's rights activist. Well, I'm not really active in a lot these days. I've restarted the gym and I make these videos and I try to take each day at a time, but I don't really consider myself an activist in the sense of, crusading for some cause. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, by the way, but I personally don't think I am. Um, and, I don't entirely agree with everything the men's rights movement comes out with because, in some ways, they're guilty of doing what the feminists do. Feminists say the whole world's stacked against women and they constantly play the victimhood narrative for women. To be honest, men's rights activists do that on some level for men. And in that process, they downplay the struggles of the other side, i.e., women. Just as some feminists downplay the struggles of men, I would say too many feminists do that. Some men's rights activists do downplay the struggles of women, and they'll dismiss things like rape statistics just offhand. I don't like that. I think it doesn't help their cause. Having said that, between feminism and the MRA movement, I would say feminism definitely is in a far better position in terms of the platforms it has. I mean, it's absolutely mainstream in the sense that there's kind of a default attitude of giving a feminist viewpoint airtime. Uh, as soon as a masculist viewpoint or an MRA viewpoint is aired, it's immediately deemed to be like on the sidelines. But this is actually a very serious issue because when you look at the likes of Andrew Tate and there's others, what happens when young men are constantly shamed? This kind of relates to the video I made about does Misandry push men more to the right? I don't think it's as simple actually as left and right because those things encompass a whole range of areas. But I do think unquestionably any group that is constantly shamed is going to be pushed away from any sort of compromise, any sort of agreement, because it's just human nature. If people are constantly shamed, they feel resentful. That's why people get defensive on constant talk about reparations and making up for the crimes of empire and so on, because people feel, well, wait a second, why should ordinary British citizens pay for the wrongs of empire 100, 200, 300 years ago? Um, it's People resent that sort of shaming approach, especially when it's inaccurate. Um, and so this question does Misandry push men more to the right? It's not necessarily pushing more to the right, but I think, well, I suppose it is when you look at, a lot of these masculist influencers or masculist um, activists, the likes of Andrew Tate, can be described as fairly well to the right. But I don't think it's that simple because there's plenty of conservative men who toe the line of kind of telling feminists what they want to hear. It's I think the power of feminism in Western society is huge. I really do. The feminists, of course, will laugh at that. They say, oh, but there's still many issues that affect women. And there are. But what I would argue is if you consider, a man who criticizes feminism and he's in public life, if he's a politician, he will immediately face heat. And we know this because it's happened. There are male MPs who have criticized feminism and they've been absolutely pilloried, absolutely, pretty much everything short of losing their job. Um, and the fact that it is so difficult to publicly criticize feminism in itself shows that feminists have a privileged position in that sense. They get all the airtime. They get the immediate default victimhood card. An example of this is that recent thing on Question Time, where Ava Evans was trying to downplay male suicide. Then, of course, we know the story. Fox and Woodson have the little segment. I think it was a wasted opportunity. Fox has subsequently been arrested on another issue. This is where, just very briefly, I think Lawrence Fox lets himself down. He does stupid things. I think he has some good arguments, but he I think he's a little bit spontaneous sometimes, and he's perhaps taking absolute free speech literally and overlooking the fact that unfortunately in this day and age there are consequences to what people say. Um, in the sense that but I understand he was arrested for advocating vandalism of the ULEZ cameras. I've no sympathy for that. As much as I agree with Fox in other areas, if you're advocating criminality, and you aspire to be the mayor of London, that's just stupid. I've no sympathy with him. And I think he lets himself down with stuff like that. Even if he was joking, it's not responsible. Um, but I digress. I digress. Um, I guess I just mentioned Fox because he was the man in question of that recent debate. Um, but if men have all the power as feminists insist, why is it so hard to criticize feminism? Why is it if a man in public life does, he will immediately risk losing his job, getting pilloried, pigeonholed as some sort of bitter man who's against women's rights. This is one of the most toxic and manipulative things that is done. If you criticize a certain aspect of feminism, oh, well, then you're against women's rights. This reductionist argument, and that's what I would call it, it's a reductionist argument because it's taking um, a certain viewpoint and saying, well, unless you're with us 100%, you're against us. This is with us or against us mindset. Only in very, very few cases I think is that valid because most things in life are not black and white. Some things are. I think what happened yesterday in Ukraine, the Russian airstrike on a village killing 51 civilians, is black and white. I don't think there's any caveat to that. But I think most things in life do have layers of complexity to them. So, when feminists talk about male privilege, it kind of sickens me because my immediate thought is Tyne-Cot Cemetery in northern France, which is one of the biggest World War One. I think it is actually the biggest British World War One cemetery. Now, where the hell is the male privilege of those thousands and thousands of men, some of them very young, who were slaughtered defending their country, obliged to defend their country? Indeed, thousands of young Ukrainian men. Now, this is not to say that Ukrainian women haven't sacrificed. It shouldn't be a battle of the sexes. All Ukrainians have been in this struggle, but it was something uniquely stipulated on men on the invasion. Zelensky ordered that all able-bodied Ukrainian men stay and fight. Now, that was imposed, and I'm not condemning Zelensky for that. It was, his country had been invaded. It would be the same in any country, but it is a reality that in times of war, men are uniquely expected to fight and die. Women do, but for them it is a choice. A woman can flee. It's a terrible choice. It's a terrible thing, and in no way am I downplaying that. But I do say that men are uniquely expected to fight and die. Women can't say that. They just can't, because it is not true. Throughout history, and Will Noland, I believe, touched on this in his lecture, men have been uniquely expected to fight and die. In fact, I watched, and this is in any culture, I remember watching the series on the Old West. It was a Ken Burns documentary, and he was famous for very comprehensive documentaries based on photo archives. He'd done one on the American Civil War. But anyway, the one about the Old West, he quotes as one Native American group. I think it may have been the Sioux, but don't quote me on that. And he said that the warriors, the braves of that nation, were, they would go into battle against another tribe or against white settlers, but the bigger fear was not dying in battle. It was going back to the women, because they would be so shamed that, their life wasn't worth living. That's happened throughout history. Think of the White Feather Campaign in World War One, which no doubt had a role in sending men to the death. So when feminists talk about male privilege, I can't help but think the millions and millions of men who have died defending the homelands in times of war. Now, of course, there's been civilian atrocities, and not for a second am I downplaying that, but it's something uniquely expected of men to fight and die. Women also, play a role, and I'm not ignorant about that. My own grandmother, for example, worked in a munitions factory during the war. It was difficult, dangerous work, so I'm not downplaying that. I mean, I've seen those little memes which don't really help the MRA movement, which shows, soldiers in the trenches and then Edwardian ladies sipping tea. Well, that is overly simplistic as well, because most women didn't have that life. That's a bit overly simplistic. Certainly, upper class women did. I guess that was more a jibe at the likes of the Pankhursts, because they were pretty upper class. And, you know, for all the rightful place she has in history, Emmeline Pankhurst, was she very much was part of that war effort and expected young men to die. She actually put aside the women's suffrage movement during the war years. Um, But I really think this is partly men to blame, though. I think men are too reluctant to talk about these things and too reluctant to frankly push back a little bit against the feminist narrative. Um, Now, if you're a feminist, you might be saying, "Oh, but wait, Nathan, I'm not ignoring male suicide. I'm not ignoring those issues." Well, maybe you're not personally, but the fact of the matter is, a lot of feminists do try to downplay these things. In that question time segment, the whole contention was that the other panelists had suggested a potential minister for men to address these issues, and Ava Evans had been downplaying it. You know, that to me shows the callousness and the disregard some feminists have for these issues. And other feminists will say, "Oh, but I've lost a brother or a relative to suicide." I'm not saying that women don't care about this. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think feminists are guilty of pushing the false narrative of male privilege. I mean, what does that mean? I've seen a little illustration showing like a racing line, and it shows three women and three men, and the three women, it shows that they've got barriers in front, they've got washing, and like they implying that their housework is imposed on them, and then the men have just a free track. But what does that imply? It implies that men have no challenges in life. Um, Now, if we look at something in the workplace, and we've heard all the time about pay disparity, that's not a black and white issue. Again, um, every job I've ever had, the male and female staff are paid exactly the same, and that's true of most jobs. I think there is disparity probably when you look at CEOs. Um, But is this from discrimination against women, or is it about output? I'm not sure. I'm not qualified enough to know all the details of that. And it may well be that women do get a raw deal. So I'm not going to make a blanket statement on that. I simply don't know enough. But again, there's a false narrative when feminist politicians talk about we will ensure women are paid the same as men. That implies that that's true across the board. In the vast majority of jobs, women are paid the same as men. You apply for a job as a barista in a coffee shop, you will be paid exactly the same as your male colleague. If you, in education, actually, the top roles in education, at least in this country, are all filled by women. Um, and it's illegal to discriminate against someone on grounds of sex, so a woman can't be turned down from a job because she's a woman. Um, this is not to say that things are perfect for women, and I don't want to give that impression. There are areas, I think, for example, the rape conviction rate remains too low, and I don't think that can be just dismissed as, oh, well, um, there's not enough. Some people might say, oh, well, it's a lot of false accusers or something. No, I think women are let down too often in that area. Um, and there's other things, for example, the WASPy scheme about pensions, there is unfairness there. Absolutely, there are things that impact women, and I never deny that. So I don't say that, because life is better for women in the West, it's perfect. I don't think it is. Um, I don't know what's like to be a woman. I don't know the challenges women face. I can't say that. But I am a man, and I can say that life isn't as easy for men as feminists imply. And I think it's Misandry's bile to say that. And I think they need to be challenged when they say that. It isn't just the issue about wartime or suicide. There's a lot of other things, I think men are more harshly judged on their economic status. Um, I think, maybe not so much today, but definitely in the up to the recent past, if a man wasn't financially secure, he was seen as, I don't like using this term, but a loser. Women, not as much. I don't think women were judged as harshly in that area. Maybe still judged, but not as harshly. Being financially stable in a relationship is something that was more, maybe not so much today, but more placed on men. Um, Men disproportionately occupy the more dangerous jobs. If you take a list of the 10 most dangerous professions, it would probably include things like maintenance workers, oil rig workers, firefighters. Those sort of professions are predominantly occupied by men. And some of that may be that historically women were discriminated. They weren't allowed to join those professions. Not today. That can't be said today because it's illegal to discriminate. In fact, a lot of companies will actively even favor female or ethnic minority candidates to prove that they're not bigoted. So anyway, I'm going to wrap this up, but I do think misandry exists. I think there isn't a day goes by where there isn't some column in the newspaper having a generic rant about men. And I know this because I read newspapers regularly, various publications. It happens all the time. And I'm sick and tired of the double standards. I'm sick of this misandry getting a free pass because you can be absolutely sure, even in the tabloids, if a male columnist was to make some generic rant about women, he would be fired without question, because feminists would be out with their pitchforks. All I'm saying is that people face challenges in life. Some challenges are more faced by women, true, but some challenges are also more faced by men. And what I am tired of is feminists always, 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 regardless of the issue, trying to angle it that, well, it's women that are more impacted. And absurdly, they will find this with pretty much anything. I mean, one that I question is we often hear climate change affects women more. Well, that may tap into areas like in developing countries, women may do certain professions that are more, I don't know, more prone to drought or flooding issues. But if a massive storm hits, it's indiscriminate. It's going to kill thousands of people. Um, so these oversimplifications, it's why is it a problem? Because we always hear men need to speak out about the problems. We need to encourage men to speak. Men need to get in touch with their feelings. Men need to speak. And what happens when they do? Feminists try to downplay it. So that's wrong, and I think it needs to be challenged. And I am so tired of these bigots, these misandrous bigots, sort of thinking they can get a green light with it, because unfortunately they can. There is a large portion of the excuse me, mainstream media that will give them this platform. and allow them to just say this without challenge. Without challenge. Women have it terrible. Women are kept down. Men have all the power. Now, feminists might say, oh, but those issues that you're talking about, like war and so on, it's mostly men who start wars. And I say, yeah, you're right, it is. And they might say, well, the patriarchy hurts men as well, so you should be against the patriarchy. But there is an inherent contradiction because if they're saying, if they accept that men are hurt by the patriarchy, how can they simultaneously talk about male privilege? That's a contradiction. You can't say it's two things. You can't accept that men are hurt by the patriarchy, oh, but they have privilege. It's one or the other. It doesn't work that way. If someone has privilege, they're not being hurt. So I don't like using the term privilege generally. I think it's overused and misplaced. I mean, what does privilege really mean? To me, privilege is getting something for nothing. It's like you're kind of pampered and you're just given things on a plate. And yeah, inheritance would be privilege in a sense. If someone's born into a wealthy family and they get huge inheritance, that is privilege by definition. Um, and they may be predominantly white and male, but you may also get someone who's a minority or a woman who's born into that situation. And then we tap into, I think Douglas Murray brought this up. What if you have a wealthy person, they're born into that sort of privilege, but they have some sort of genetic condition which makes them severely ill? Is that privilege? So not everything is black and white, and people are far too damn quick to judge others. We all do it, but um, judging people on the demographic to me, is a height of ignorance, and I have a big problem with it. But I don't consider myself an MRA per se because I don't go around crusading on men's issues. But what I do say is I do not apologise for saying those things matter, and I do not apologise for saying that feminist misandry has to be called out. If misogyny should be called out, and it should, so should misandry. I'm sick and tired of the double standards, and I'm sick and tired of certain feminists constantly downplaying these things, constantly trying to delegitimize issues that impact men. It's callous. It's callous. And the whole Lawrence Fox thing, he actually said that he'd lost friends to suicide, and the way he went about it was wrong, but maybe, it touched a nerve with him. And why shouldn't it? I just wish he went about it in a different way. I honestly think if him and Wooten had kind of seriously addressed her misandry rather than turning it into banter, it would be a lot harder for them to be criticised because a lot of people would say, well, actually, they're making a good point. And I think they'd still have the jobs. Hopefully, one would think that. Well, I say hopefully, but Will Nolan lost his job simply for talking about these issues, proving that men can't even talk about it. Now, I'm talking here on my channel, but if I was an elected politician, I could be deselected. I could face, rebuke from my party leader because oh, it's bad for PR. This is the reality of so-called male privilege. Let me know your thoughts.